Spider-Man Hostile Takeover. Chapter 8. Is the work boring you? Theodore Payton asked. I'm awake! Peter jumped up and sat up at his workstation, pushing away sleep. As he began to focus, he let the humiliation wash over him. How much easier it would be, he thought, if he didn't have to conceal his life as Spider-Man. All those times his Aunt May thought he was forgetful, or unreliable, or flighty. Wouldn't it be refreshing to tell her he hadn't forgotten to run that errand, or meet her at the bus? No, he'd been saving lives. All those times, Harry thought, he didn't take their friendship seriously. And now the lab administrator thought he had been out partying too late to get a good night's sleep. Even on a Sunday, Theodore Payton was wearing a suit with a bow tie pulled tight enough for the edges to slice bread. Maybe even saw through wood. He was thin and tall, and with his severely parted hair and rounded little eyeglasses. He looked like a 19th century schoolteacher. Not a nice one either. The kind of schoolteacher who liked to whack a student with a stick for not conjugating their Greek fast enough. Payton, like Peter, was a scientist. But he was also in charge of the lab's finances, so it could never be predicted if he was going to be wearing a lab coat over his suit or sitting in a corner somewhere balancing numbers on a spreadsheet. The lab's director, the man who had been Peter's mentor in science since his undergraduate days, was in charge of the real science, but Theodore ran the business end of things. He pinched the pennies and made sure he wrung every last bit of work out of the underpaid employees. Peter put up with it because he loved the boss and he believed in the science, but there were times when he wasn't sure if that was enough. I'm sure there are places you'd rather be on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Payton droned. Science may not be sufficiently glamorous for you. That said, we don't pay you to sleep here. It wasn't as if Peter was getting paid by the hour, and he put in at least 60 hours in the past week. He came in because there was work to be done, and he was glad to do it, at least abstractly. He did agree with Payton on one thing, though. There were places he'd rather be. The lab was like a larger, more scientific version of Peter's apartment. There were workstations, mechanical equipment, computer monitors, tools, and prototypes in various stages of completion. They were everywhere. The place had a mad scientist vibe if there ever was one. Point made, Theodore, Peter said. I was just up late, but I'll get back to work. Trouble sleeping again? Payton asked. But there wasn't a hint of kindness. Peter had been using that excuse for as long as he'd worked in the lab. Payton wasn't buying it, if he ever had. The thing was, Peter really didn't mind working on a Sunday. New data had come in from their synthetic neural relay tests, and numbers had to be crunched. Peter loved the work. It was exciting, and it was important. The place was on the forefront of the science that would lead to sensitive, fully functional prosthetic limbs. They were doing things that no one had ever done before. Things that would make a difference for millions of people. The applications for wounded veterans alone would be staggering. Being Spider-Man was important, but this was different. Peter had never asked for his amazing abilities. He never yearned to be a costume crime fighter. He'd always wanted to be a scientist, though, sure, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. But wasn't an aptitude for science a great power? Didn't he have a responsibility to pursue his abilities here as vigorously as he did on the street? He loved being Spider-Man. Most of the time. In a way, Peter never felt more liberated than when he was in that suit. Lately, though, he'd begun to worry about that being a web-slinger wasn't just part of his life, but getting in the way of his life. He spent so much of his time fighting bad guys, and those bad guys always seemed to come back. Of course he saved a lot of lives, but if he stayed home and watched television last night, Andy would still be alive. What about the people who suffered when nutcases like Electro or the Scorpion or the Shocker came gunning for him? Was Spider-Man a deterrent or a magnet for these crazies? By being out there, Was he making things worse? If you're not up to the task, Peyton said, bringing him down to earth, I could replace you with someone else who is willing to dedicate their time to this important work. There is no need to dip into the endless pool of scientific slave labor, Peter said. Give me half an hour and I'll have the data ready. 30 minutes later, with the work done, Peter walked into Peyton's office and found him reviewing computer models that represented artificial neural pathways. The results have been uploaded, Peter told him. Peyton nodded and then opened a new file on his computer. His slender fingers began flying across the keyboard as he located the data which Peter had generated and integrated with the new model he was running. Peter watched as animated arms appear on the screen, then attach themselves to animated stumps. Flowing lights, representing the transfer of data from the subject's brain to the artificial limbs, began to flow down the arms and back again. A few more keystrokes, and the hands clenched and unclenched. You seem to have managed to get the job done, Peyton said. I hope your nap time wasn't too severely inconvenienced. The boss's work is amazing, Peter said. He hardly even heard Peyton's snide comment anymore. This is exciting stuff, Peter said. Yes, Peyton agreed. I have to admit, you contribute a great deal to the effort, Parker. Your mind is first rate, you know. I have no complaints about your abilities. It's your efforts I find wanting. You must remember that we are serving a higher cause here, and I'd hate to see your sloppy work habits get in the way. You truly are your own worst enemy. Given the kinds of enemies he'd make over the years, Peter wished this was true. He'd rather face himself than the Rhino pretty much any day. Point taken, Ted. My name is Theodore, as you well know, and now your glib response will not insulate you from the larger point. Anyone else would have been gone a long time ago, but the director likes you, and you add value when you make an honest effort. Peter had been so caught up in watching the computer models on the screen and ignoring Peyton that he didn't notice that someone else had entered the lab. He wished not for the first time that his spider sense would tingle for embarrassing situation as well as danger, because he felt pretty sure that the attractive young woman had heard him getting chewed out. Ah, excellent, Peyton said when he spotted the woman. Peter, this is the new undergraduate assistant, Anika Adikairi. She is, among other things, technologically competent. Anika, this is Peter Parker, former graduate assistant, now an employee. You make it sound so exciting, Peter said. Hi, she said, grinning noncommittally. Peyton, as usual, was oblivious to the awkwardness of the moment. Peter, please show Anika around, he suggested. Get her familiar with the lab and maybe have her start collating the test results from the models I've just ran. That should help bring her up to speed. The sooner we can put her to productive use, the better. Will do, Peter said. He was just going to have to pretend he didn't notice how insanely pretty she was. Not that she was trying. Her long dark hair was tied in a loose ponytail. She wore old jeans and, in the category of things that definitely didn't help, a faded Spider-Man t-shirt. No matter how rumpled she managed to make herself, it didn't do much to conceal those enormous brown eyes and a heart-shaped face that seemed to radiate kindness. Sorry I heard you get raked over the coals, she told him as they walked away from the office. I mean, I heard it, and you know I heard it, so it's best to get your embarrassment out in the open, right? And you're in the sciences, you say, Peter countered. She laughed. You got me. I just hate awkward situations. I know the project's lead scientist thinks highly of you, but that guy... Theodore Peyton, Peter said. More like Peyton, am I right? That's the best he can do? Hey, I'm warming up here, he replied. He's actually not a terrible guy, but he lives to balance budgets and squeeze every last drop of our resources. Sometimes I want to strangle him, but the fact is we'd have a hard time keeping the lights on without him. And she thinks you're a slacker, she said with an easy grin. Got it. Now let's see the cool stuff. Cool stuff it is. Peter agreed as he began to show her around the lab. It's quiet today, being Sunday and all. But more often than not, a lot of the actions happens at nights and on the weekends. I'll give you my number in case you need to reach me then. The boss pretty much never goes home, never sleeps, and never stops working. He's relentless, which is great, and scary, and intimidating. If you're here, it's because you're super smart. But when he starts talking, you're going to feel like he made a mistake and you're out of your league. Resist this feeling. It's a rite of passage. Besides, unlike Peyton, he's really nice, and he doesn't do it to make you feel small. Believe me, I'm ready to be humbled, she said. I've read his papers on theoretical electroencephalography. I still can't believe I got the internship. Where did you go to school? Empire State University, she said. Ah, my alma mater, Peter told her. Cool t-shirt, by the way. I'm wearing it ironically, she said. Scientists are the real superhero. They stand among them, yes, Peter replied. Anyhow, that's the kitchen in there. Don't eat the frozen granola bars. Peyton loved them for some reasons, and he always knows exactly how many are supposed to be there. Not much of a chance, but thanks for the heads up. Once they finished the tour of the lab, Peter sat her down at a workstation, set her up with the login and password, and showed her the files on which she was going to work. We'll start with something basic, he said. Nothing you do today is going to challenge you, but it'll help you get familiar with the terms of the work, which will make it easier for you to dive into the good stuff. Keep that in mind when you're thinking about all the better things you could be doing with the Sunday afternoon. If I weren't here, I'd be studying, she said. That's life in the city. She paused for an awkward moment. How about you? Do anything fun last night? Hot date? This was the time to mention MJ. That would be the right thing. But it would also be a little awkward because they both know she was fishing, and he didn't want to shut her down. Just hung out with a friend. There'd be plenty of time to tell her his story. Later.